Explain the concept of page blobs and how they are used for storing data in Azure Storage. Page blobs are a type of Azure Blob Storage specifically designed for storing virtual machine disks and other random access workloads. They allow you to read and write data in individual 512-byte pages, making them suitable for scenarios requiring random access. How can you automate data movement between Azure Blob Storage and Azure Data Lake Storage using Azure Data Factory? Azure Data Factory allows you to create data pipelines that automate the movement of data between Azure Blob Storage and Azure Data Lake Storage. By defining source, transformation, and destination activities, you enable seamless data integration. Explain how to ensure data security in transit when transferring files to Azure Blob Storage using Secure Transfer Required setting. Enabling this Secure Transfer Required setting in Azure Blob Storage ensures that data transferred to and from the storage account is encrypted during transit. This setting enforces the use of secure HTTPS connections for data transfer. How can you enable historical versioning for files stored in Azure File Storage using file versioning? Azure File Storage's file versioning feature allows you to maintain historical versions of files. By enabling this feature, changes made to files are retained, enabling you to access and recover previous versions as needed. Explain how to manage and monitor the lifecycle of your Azure Storage resources using Azure Policy. Azure Policy allows you to define rules and standards for your Azure resources, including storage. You can use policies to enforce naming conventions, access controls, and compliance standards, helping you manage and monitor storage resources effectively. How can you configure Azure Blob Storage's storage analytics to track and analyze storage activities for diagnostic and troubleshooting purposes? You can configure storage analytics to track metrics and logging for storage activities. By enabling it and specifying the desired data retention period, you collect data that helps in diagnosing issues, optimizing performance, and ensuring compliance. Explain how to implement cross-account data replication between Azure Blob Storage accounts in different regions using geo-replication. Geo-replication allows you to replicate data between two Azure Blob Storage accounts located in different regions. By configuring replication settings, you can ensure that your data is available and up-to-date in both regions for disaster recovery scenarios. How can you ensure that data written to Azure Blob Storage is tamper-proof and immutable using write once, read many worm scenarios? Azure Blob Storage's legal hold feature, coupled with append blobs or immutable blob storage, allows you to create write once, read many worm scenarios. This ensures that once data is written, it cannot be modified or deleted for a specified period. Explain the concept of blob prefixes in Azure Blob Storage and how they are used for organizing and accessing data. Blob prefixes are hierarchical structures within a blob container that allow you to organize blobs by creating folder-like structures. They help in categorizing and managing data, making it easier to access and manage blobs within the container. How can you implement automated data retention policies for specific data types in Azure Table Storage? You can implement automated data retention policies for specific data types in Azure Table Storage by using time-to-live (TTL) settings. By setting the TTL value for entities, you ensure that they are automatically deleted after a certain time, complying with data retention policies. Explain how Azure Storage's Premium Performance tier provides optimized storage for Azure virtual machines. Azure Storage's Premium Performance tier provides high-performance, low-latency storage for Azure virtual machines. It is designed for workloads requiring high IPS and throughput, such as databases and virtual machine disks. How can you enable secure access to Azure Blob Storage using Azure Active Directory authentication for authorized applications? By enabling Azure Active Directory, Azure AD, authentication for your Azure Blob Storage account, you allow authorized applications and users to authenticate using Azure AD credentials. This enhances security by centralizing identity management and access control. Explain how Azure Storage's blob service properties can be used to enforce data retention policies using delete retention. Delete retention in blob service properties allows you to enforce data retention policies. Once enabled, it prevents the accidental or intentional deletion of blobs for the specified retention period, ensuring data compliance. How can you implement custom error handling and logging for Azure Storage resources using Azure Functions? You can create Azure Functions that are triggered by storage events, such as blob creations or deletions. Within the function, you can implement custom error handling and logging logic to respond to specific events and scenarios. Explain how Azure Storage's append blobs are used in scenarios where data needs to be added in a sequential manner. Append blobs are used in scenarios where data needs to be added sequentially, such as logging or auditing. Each append operation adds data to the end of the blob, maintaining the order in which data was added. How can you optimize costs for long-term data retention using Azure Blob Storage's archive, access tier, and blob lifecycle management policies? You can optimize costs by configuring blob lifecycle management policies to transition data to the archive, access tier based on defined rules. This lower cost tier is suitable for data that requires long-term retention and infrequent access. Explain how to implement access control to specific Azure Blob Storage resources using Shared Access Signatures (SAS) with constraints. You can generate Shared Access Signatures (SAS) with specific constraints to control access to specific Azure Blob Storage resources. Constraints can include permissions, start and expiry times, IP address restrictions, and more. How can you implement automated data movement from on-premises environments to Azure Blob Storage using Azure Data Factory and self-hosted integration runtimes? Azure Data Factory allows you to create data pipelines that move data from on-premises environments to Azure Blob Storage. By using self-hosted integration runtimes, you enable secure communication between on-premises data sources and Azure. Explain how Azure Blob Storage's immutability policies can be used for data compliance and protection against tampering. Immutability policies in Azure Blob Storage allow you to create a policy that prevents the modification or deletion of blobs for a specified retention period. This ensures data compliance and protection against unauthorized changes. How can you use data archiving capabilities in Azure Blob Storage to store rarely accessed data while maintaining accessibility? Azure Blob Storage's archive access tier is designed for data archiving. By transitioning rarely accessed data to the archive tier using lifecycle management policies, you can store data at a lower cost while ensuring it remains accessible. How can you use Azure Storage's Event Grid integration to automate workflows based on storage events? Azure Storage's Event Grid integration allows you to trigger Azure Functions, Logic Apps, or other services when specific events occur in your storage account. For example, you can automate processing when a new blob is uploaded. Explain how to secure data access to Azure Blob Storage resources using Azure Private Link. Azure Private Link allows you to access Azure services, including Azure Blob Storage, securely through a private IP address within your virtual network. This prevents data from traversing the public internet, enhancing security. How can you implement disaster recovery for Azure storage accounts using Geo-redundant storage (GRS) replication? Geo-redundant storage (GRS) replication copies data to a secondary region, providing disaster recovery capabilities. In the event of a regional outage, data can be accessed from the replicated copy in the secondary region. Explain how Azure Storage's blob storage lifecycle management policies can be used to automate data management tasks. Blob storage lifecycle management policies allow you to define rules for automatically managing the lifecycle of your blob data. This includes tasks such as transitioning data to different access tiers, deleting old data, and more. How can you implement access control to Azure Blob Storage resources using Shared Access Signatures (SAS) for a limited time? You can generate Shared Access Signatures (SAS) tokens with specific start and expiry times to grant temporary access to Azure Blob Storage resources. Once the token expires, access is automatically revoked. Explain the concept of Data Lake Storage Gen 2 and its advantages over traditional Azure Blob Storage for big data scenarios. Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2 combines the capabilities of Azure Blob Storage with the hierarchical file system and improved analytics features. It's optimized for big data scenarios, offering better organization, access control, and analytics capabilities. How can you implement georeplication for Azure Storage accounts in different regions using cross-region replication? Cross-region replication allows you to replicate data between Azure Storage accounts in different regions. This helps maintain data availability and compliance by storing copies of data in multiple geographic locations. Explain how Azure Blob Storage's soft delete for containers works and its benefits. Soft delete for containers retains deleted containers along with their blobs for a specified retention period. This provides a recovery window during which accidentally deleted containers and their contents can be restored. How can you manage access permissions for Azure Blob Storage resources using stored access policies? Stored access policies allow you to manage and control access permissions more efficiently by defining a set of permissions and constraints. This simplifies access management and reduces the need to update permissions directly on each resource. Explain how data replication options in Azure Storage can be used to ensure data durability and availability. Azure Storage offers various data replication options, including locally redundant storage, LRS, geo-redundant storage, GRS, and zone-redundant storage, ZRES. These options replicate data across different locations to ensure durability and availability.
Hey, if you like the content, please subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a bite of Azure brilliance.